Budget bickering goes on at the Capitol as programs hang in the balance. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We're into the new state fiscal year. Things are not resolved at the Capitol, but we're going to figure out all the solutions at this table. And with me today to help figure out these solutions, or at least say what's going on, Kent Redfield is back. He is Professor Emeritus, Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield, and an expert in campaign finance and other things. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
And first time on the show, Jordan Abudayyeh, who is State House reporter for News Channel 20 in Springfield. Nice to have you here. And
I know you've been having me.
You're welcome. And I know you've been watching the events over there. So let's start with you, Jordan. There was again, the legislature was in for 2 days this week. Democrats in both chambers, but they got it passed in the Senate, were trying to go for a 1-month budget to keep government operating without figuring out who to close down. Where are we?
Well, the Senate passed that bill, as you mentioned. The House didn't have the members. I think it was really just an attendance thing, not so much as members upset with the bill. Republicans in committee called the bill sort of a political maneuver because they think that these services are already essential, so they're already going to be funded. They mentioned trooper salaries, Department of Corrections officers. Those things are things that are not going to stop being paid in the event of a budget impasse. So they say, you're bringing up things like WIC and homeless children and childcare because those are good political talking points for you. But they say this budget overspends. It's 1/12 of your budget that you just attempted to pass. So they were not having it.
Right, and Governor Rauner's people say, well, this is, as you say, just 1/12 of a budget that's like nearly $4 billion, they say, out of balance over 12 months. So it's still unconstitutional because it would be unbalanced. Kent, it's kind of normal. I mean, we have had some temporary budgets in past years, but it looks like this governor doesn't want to do that right now.
Well, in past years, we've had a sense that things were going to get done. We weren't that far apart, and right now we're at a huge impasse in terms of what the governor says is his bottom line and what the Democratic-controlled legislature is willing to do, particularly on the turnaround agenda. And so you see Democrats trying to fund social services. This was not the Department of Insurance they were trying to fund. They're trying to fund social services, which are things that their members will get heat on. The governor,
child care for elderly folks in home care, so you don't have to go to a nursing home, that kind of thing.
And the governor is there, in a different venue, trying to get state employees paid, and so they're arguing about kind of who, if we have a shutdown, who's going to feel the effects and who's going to feel the heat, and therefore we've got this. We're trying to leverage it for one or the other side's advantage. If we pay state workers, then it's not as dramatic and the average citizen doesn't see it. If we don't fund some of these social service agencies, maybe the general public doesn't see it, but constituents and groups that are very close to the Democrats are going to feel the heat and be talking to the members. And so you can kind of see differing strategies of how they're trying to play the shutdown to put pressure on one side or the other.
Right, and of course the governor's turnaround agenda involves, he wants the legislature to go for term limits, he wants to have a property tax freeze, but also a limit on paying prevailing wages for local projects, which the unions don't want. And as Speaker Madigan would say, this goes against core beliefs of many Democrats. Democrats have a big majority in the legislature, but the governor wants to use this crisis to get those things done, and the Democrats don't want to do that. And so we are left where we are left. There's probably 1 or 2 state employees watching the show in Springfield, Quincy, Macomb, and everybody has a question, what happens to state paychecks? And Comptroller Leslie Munger, who was recently appointed by the governor after the death of Judy Bartopinka, she's a Republican. She addressed the media in Chicago late in the week. She talked about some deadlines, including some state employees she thinks might miss some checks as early as, July 15th, although she's also gone to court with the help, or Lisa Madigan has gone to court, the Attorney General, to say, give us direction who has to be paid. Jordan, should people start worrying if they don't have cash flow?
It's interesting. I talked to some Republicans yesterday, and they say we've got a couple weeks before you really start to feel the pinch. So I really think that lawmakers aren't feeling the pressure right now, but I think people at home are sitting and looking at Springfield and going, am I going to get a paycheck? And it's surprising that the issue is so complicated, that once this budget deal looked like it was not going to happen, the governor came out and said, I'm going to pay you. The Attorney General said, wait, you don't have those powers. Now we need to go to court over it. Leslie Munger mentioned today that she wants to look at this process so that the next time this happens, we don't have all of this confusion. But for right now, I mean, it looks like it's going to be left up to the courts to see who gets the power to write the checks, because right now nobody has any power to do that.
And I'm not sure it's exactly the comptroller and the Attorney General, teaming up and working together.
Well,
If the Attorney General wants clarification, can you make a payment without an appropriation?
Right.
And how does the Fair Labor Standards Act come into play, which says on essential employees you have to pay them at least minimum wage if we're requiring them to come to work. And when we did this in 2007 and 2009, it was kind of a friendly lawsuit with a wink and a nod. And this doesn't look so friendly. There's no kind of consensus that the best thing politically would be to kind of pay everybody. And so I'm not sure how this is going to turn out, but clearly, and no one knows what the court will say. The court could say, well, it's the same thing as 2007. You can't distinguish. Everybody should get the full amount. Or the court could say, it's really your problem that you don't have payroll systems that allow you to do this, or in the last, however long it's been since 2007, 7 years, you haven't figured it out, and therefore you're stuck. You need to comply with federal law, and that's all you get. So
Leslie Munger, the comptroller, was talking about how if certain employees are supposed to be paid at just minimum wage under any court order, they don't really have the technology to get that done easily. No. So we're kind of in limbo. I did notice in her comments, of course, she is a Republican. She was appointed by a Republican governor, and she was saying this is basically because the legislature, we have no resolution of this because we didn't get a balanced budget from the legislature. They should do their jobs. It's their fault, and yet they get paid, which is just interesting because she will face election in 2016, and the Democrats, this whole process is making the comptroller's office, who pays state checks, a higher profile. So she's had a press conference in Springfield a week ago. She had a press conference in Chicago then this week, but of course it gets around everywhere. And I don't know. It's just kind of interesting, the partisanship there, and we'll see what the Democrats do with that.
Yeah, she's got an interesting dilemma because she needs to show independence as a constitutional officer, and there have been times when she has, including when we had a dispute over taking fair share out of employees, state workers' paychecks.
Right.
On the other hand, she was appointed by the governor, and you need a lot of money to run statewide, and there's nobody that's got more money to put into campaigns than the governor. And so she's got an interesting balancing act there in terms of looking independent, but also wanting to be supportive of, who was her original patron in terms of getting the position.
We'll see where that goes. Governor Rauner has been signing some bills and using his amendatory veto powers on particularly one that seems to get under the skin of legislators. They are, of course, traveling to Springfield more than they'd like in the summer, but he used an amendatory veto this week that would block what has become an automatic pay raise, that they are supposed to get a cost of living increase. And this, of course, is the kind of thing where it may not make a difference in the grand scheme, but the people out there kind of hate it when they hear that legislators are getting a pay raise when there's no state budget. So where does this go?
I think people look at Springfield and they say, you're not doing your job. If I wasn't doing my job, I wouldn't get paid. So I think from the political side of things, it's a very easy red herring almost to throw into the argument. Like, hey, you shouldn't be getting paid. You're not doing your job, when I think some lawmakers agree with him. Some have already said that they're not going to take their paychecks, in addition to saying we shouldn't get raises at this time. But I think it's a political game almost to throw that into the argument at a time when we should really be focusing on a budget and getting a budget in place and maybe trying to compromise instead of further come apart on these issues.
And, I think it is complicated in terms of how we deal with pay raises, and also there's a continuing controversy when the governor, Quinn, tried to veto legislative salaries, which was clearly a separation of powers. And so, I think you can explain the legislature side of this, but this is a campaign, and
Right.
the axiom in campaigns is if you're explaining, you're losing.
Yeah, which is interesting because some of the Democratic legislators who had a press conference about their one-year budget were saying, well, we took 12 furlough days. We gave back $3,000 a year for like 5 years, and that was $15,000. But then, because they went to court when Pat Quinn tried to block their pay, and the court said you cannot, under the Constitution, diminish a legislator's pay or an elected person's pay during their term of office. That's why what is now automatic is supposed to be automatic, including this pay raise of, $1,500 or something in a year.
But it's definitely a perception issue because
That's
it looks
right.
bad for
That's
them.
right, because then everybody, the governors, people can say they're taking this raise while they're not doing their job. So it is all very weird. One, Jordan, you know that the governor was running through his turnaround agenda committee some advertising on TV. That's why commercial TV, unlike we see those things there. But he was running some anti-Mike Madigan ads for a couple of weeks saying, he just wants to raise taxes. He won't accept change. And the Service Employees International Union, which has unionized members that do a lot of this home care stuff that they get state money to do, they've been running ads showing the heartbreaking consequences of budget cuts that are coming down the road. So what effect do you think these things are having, and do they help the process of reaching a solution?
It's funny, I did a story a couple weeks ago. That was my question. Are people even paying attention to these ads, and are they learning anything from them? Is it changing minds? Is it changing hearts? It doesn't seem like most people are at all paying attention. Most of the people I talked to said, oh, the governor's running an ad, I didn't see anything. Most people now fast forward through commercials. It's summertime. Many people aren't watching TV regularly anymore. So I don't know whose opinion he's really changed with, $1 million in TV advertising across the street. I don't know. But in the same respect, the union is also running their ads on social media, which I think could grab a little bit more attention. They started on social media because the union said they didn't have enough money for a TV blitz.
It's really easy to do the Facebook
right.
thing, right?
And I think you can probably get a lot more traction there than you will on TV now.
You just say that because you're under something. You're a younger person.
I grew up with the social media
That's
age.
right.
We do see how things can blow up on social media,
Yes,
whereas
that's true.
It doesn't happen. It's easy to say, hey, look at what the governor's doing and post a link to an ad. But now that the ads are running on TV, I think what the union has is that the governor doesn't, is they do appeal to emotions, and they kind of try and take politics out of it a little bit, where you see Mike Madigan's ad and it's Mike Madigan in black and white, and it's got the dark music.
It's very campaignish.
Scenes of Chicago.
Even though it was less severe than people thought the governor was going to attack him, because it just says, he's not for a change and he wants a tax increase again.
Right.
Whereas Madigan, using his hands to the press conferences he's regularly now having, says we need to be reasonable, we need revenue and cuts. So.
And there is, in addition to how this is playing in the public, it's also how is this playing in the Speaker's office, and that is a concern. I mean, when the last time that we had, fear of a really hard shutdown with a Republican governor and a Democratically controlled legislature, I mean, it was got to be Madigan versus Edgar, and they knew each other to a certain extent. There was some amount of respect and trust and communication, and you just get a sense that there is no trust and no communication and frankly no respect that's going across from the governor's office to the Speaker's office, and that makes it harder to kind of whenever we get to the point of actually doing this, unless someone caves 100%. The other thing that's weird is that you end up treating John Cullerton, the Senate president, like he was the junior partner, when he actually has a stronger caucus and a much safer majority than the Speaker does. And you can't do anything without Collerton.
And Cullerton's been trying to work with the governor to put forth some things. That does remind me of a situation just a few weeks ago, I think it was into the new year or just before it, but the governor had met that morning with John Cullerton, the president of the Senate. He'd been in communication, at least through his staff, with Speaker Madigan. Apparently, he and Cullerton had a reasonable meeting talking about an issue, and then he had a press conference on the lawn of the executive mansion in which he basically said that Cullerton and Madigan both make millions of dollars a year through their law practices, which help reduce tax assessments for big buildings in Chicago, big properties. Therefore, they make millions of dollars from having high property taxes. That's why they want them, which seemed to indicate something almost, wrong in a very personal way, where these guys have never been charged with anything, and it's legal to have these jobs. And that kind of juxtaposition of having a meeting in the morning and then going on a personal attack in the media in the afternoon, again, is the kind of thing that really seems to not help the process.
And then every time you see them, you ask, how was that meeting you had a couple days ago? Or how was that meeting last week? And they would say, cordial. Cordial. And I'm wondering how cordial those meetings really are when they're doing things like that. But I think it's easy to make those comparisons about Cullerton and Madigan. They have big names in state politics. And if you were trying to get your way, there's no better way than to vilify Mike Madigan. To most people, he's already the villain. So, Madigan's corrupt. That's easy to understand. Everyone in Chicago's corrupt. That's a good talking point. And I think,
as Mike Madigan would say, you're talking in the extreme.
And I think
that's extreme.
But Madigan does realize that in our weekly press conferences, someone's brought up, he realizes that people pinpoint him for attacks, and he's used to it. But I do think that with Madigan, there has to be a level of trust. We heard that from former Governor Edgar before. He said, once you get Madigan's trust, he's actually, a great guy. We agreed on more than we disagreed with. Once I got his trust, and he would come to the table. So I think now it's building trust. But we've heard from a lot of Democrats that the governor has a very different bargaining style because he spent his entire life in the private sector. So a lot of people have mentioned that the lawmaking process is not the boardroom.
Right, and co-equal branches of government. One Springfield issue, and of course many state facilities are in play, but one of the proposed cuts that the governor's administration put forth when the unbalanced budget was being moved by Democrats is the Illinois State Museum, which had been slated for possible shutdown into this new fiscal year, which began July 1st. As it turns out, there's from the time there's an official notification or plan from the administration to what's COGFA stand for, the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, which is 12 legislators are on this. There is a process put in place, and it's partly because I think Governor Blagojevich was announcing closures of facilities immediately, and they passed a bill that took effect in 2004 that says if you're going to close a major state facility with more than 25 workers, there has to be like a 30-day comment period and within 50 days, this legislative commission has to come forth with a recommendation. Will it actually save money? Can you close it? And they're not allowed to do anything to close it until then. So even though we're into the new year and the State Museum, which has more than 30 workers at their main branch and 17 at a collection center and five other locations around the state, they have to stay open now until at least August 8th, and there is a hearing process set up. So how's that affecting things in Springfield? Do people on the street care about this? Certainly the people at the museum and teachers who bring their kids there do.
I think it's a big tourist attraction for the city. So the city's concerned, anytime you lose a tourist attraction, that's another thing that people aren't visiting. They're not staying in your town longer. It's a nice amenity to have in the city, and I don't think people want to see it go away. So, right now you're seeing a lot of people trying to save it, putting, Facebook posts together and committees to, save the museum. And, we'll just have to see if that works during the comment period.
The museum brings estimates have been 200,000, visitors a year, and I'm sure that includes local folks too.
And it's not a lot of money in the totality of the budget, but everybody is trying to angle one way or the other to have symbols out there that look at the bad things that are going to happen if we don't do X or Y. And so it becomes a strategy of, what do you put out there that gets sympathy, and in some ways it can build public opinion, but in other ways it just, it feeds into narratives about bad guys and good guys, it makes the inevitable coming together. you assume we're not going to go 12 months without a state budget. At some point, there's going to have to be some compromise. We can't, if we're going to settle this in an election, that doesn't take place until November of 2016. Right. So, it is hard to walk some of this stuff back.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and just through doing stories, again, you find out, you can't just close a museum. It turns out they have accreditation, which demands that to keep it, they have to be open to the public. They have contracts with, like, the National Science Foundation. They study artifacts that are found, when people are digging in road projects. They have all of these things. They have, college students studying there and graduate students, and all of that would just kind of shut down. They have to send things back if they've borrowed them from places, or people who loaned them goods to be on public display, they might get sued. So there's all these things, and it would save, even by the administration's estimate, like $4.7 million or something like that of the $6. It's less than $7 that it costs the state to operate it all year. That's not a little amount of money, but compared to, the $4 billion potential deficit in the budget, it is that. Kent, you have been involved, I think, so you can play reporter, professor / advocate on redistricting attempts to try to get the state to draw its legislative maps in a different way. There was an attempt in 2014 by Yes Illinois Maps to do a petition drive. It didn't quite reach success. There was something unconstitutional about the way they did it. There's another attempt to get this on the ballot for next year, so that after the 2020 census, we would draw maps not by the legislature drawing their own districts, but by an independent commission doing it. And there was a recent Supreme Court decision, even though it was federal districts, not state, but in Arizona, saying such a commission is okay. You can let that happen. Do you think this will ever happen in Illinois?
Well, I actually, yes. I mean, clearly there was constitutional problems with the last effort. The trial court judge indicated what they thought were the problems, and the fix, which is both in what Independent Maps is doing and also in the governor's proposal for an independent commission,
right,
essentially got rid of some constitutional issues that were beyond just whether you could put it on the ballot. And then you have to get all of the signatures.
Right,
so,
which is nearly 300,000 valid signatures,
and that's
by 6 months before the next year's election.
Difficult, but the governor did it with term limits. There's his error as a candidate, he did it.
Of course, that was thrown off the ballot too for constitutional reasons, but it made him some great publicity during the campaign, because people really like the idea of term limits.
And so the template is there. I mean, you can learn from your mistakes. They've got a new organization together, and what the Supreme Court decision did was take away the constitutional cloud of, whether or not, if you couldn't do it for congressional, then did that also kind of go to state? And that would have been another thing the Supreme Court might have had to deal with. And so this kind of clears the way. And if the legislature doesn't put it on the ballot, which I don't think they will, then it'll be up to this petition drive to get it on the ballot. And I think the prospects are better, but it's obviously not a guarantee at all.
Right. Do people care about independent maps?
I don't know if the average person cares about it. I think the people who are into the political process, I think they look at that and they say, that's probably something we should do. I don't think the average voter really cares.
This is a little like legislative pay, because what the word is for the independent maps, in addition, fairness and everything else, but the legislators shouldn't be drawing their own districts and picking their own constituents. It should be a fair process, and it has apparently worked in some states, so we will see where that goes. Tuesday, we actually have an election coming up, Jordan, because Aaron Schock decided to leave Congress early. It wasn't necessarily of his own choosing, and he's still under investigation by the feds over campaign spending and some of his office spending. So there's a grand jury that's been meeting in Springfield. But Aaron Schock is not in Congress in the 18th Congressional District. That district comes from Peoria and many places into Springfield. And we've got a campaign Tuesday, 3 Republicans, Darren LaHood, Don Reentz, Mike Flynn, 2 Democrats, Adam Lopez, Rob Mellon. Any idea how things are looking?
It is one of the most conservative districts in the state, so a lot of people are looking to the Republican field and saying, it's really a battle between those three, and whoever wins that battle is probably going to be the winner. LaHood is the establishment.
Yeah, now of course
candidate.
he's the son of Ray LaHood, who was in Congress, who then was a Republican congressman, used to work for Bob Michel as the chief of staff, who was the head of the leader of the Republicans in the U.S. Congress. Got elected on his own, served several terms, and then joined the Obama administration as their Democrat, as the transportation chief,
right.
Secretary of Transportation.
And it's interesting. I asked LaHood about this when he said he was going to run for his, dad's previous seat, and I said, well, your father's shown some bipartisanship. He went and worked for the Obama administration, and he says, well, my father and I differ on some areas, and I understand my constituency in this district, and it seems like he's running a very conservative campaign so far.
His ads talk about it all the time.
He understands.
He has to fix the damage Obama's done to the country.
Right, yeah. Obamacare, guns, every right issue, he is there, and he has taken the exact conservative road.
Now, Mike Flynn, who is the other, there's Don Raines, works at State Farm, like taking care of the building or something, and lives in a town called Benson. Mike Flynn lives in Quincy, or is based in Quincy for this, but has actually been in Washington, D.C. area for 20 years with the Breitbart conservative website. So he's been, he says, on the cutting edge of conservative media, and thinks LaHood is too establishment. LaHood has the Chamber of Commerce and the NRA behind him, and Flynn says the Chamber of Commerce is a special interest that I'm trying to overcome because they're not conservative enough on things. Do we think, there is some Tea Party strength, and with a low turnout in this, is it possible that a Flynn could give a good challenge to a LaHood, not to minimize Mr. Reents, who has also been a prison guard in his time? Yeah,
I'm doubtful. It is, you've got to have some organization there, and you can't build an organization in this district from Washington, D.C. And so if you're going to build it quickly, you got to have a lot of money. And so, LaHood will have party organization. He's well financed in relative terms, and so I think and he's made it pretty clear that it's going to be very hard to get to the right of him in terms of a lot of issues. And so I just can't imagine he's going to have very much trouble.
I'll just mention in the waning seconds that Adam Lopez, who's on the Springfield School Board, is one of the Democrats running, and Rob Mellon, who is a teacher in Quincy and also in the Army Reserve, a captain, I believe, from Quincy, who has run before, but they are locked in the battle for the Democratic opportunity to take on whoever the Republican is. We'll see how it goes. It's Tuesday, so if you're in the 18th Congressional District, that would be the day to vote if you wish to declare a party and take a ballot. With that, Kent Redfield, thank you. Jordan Abudayyeh, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.